Last step I'll show you is engaging the stabilizers. So you'll just pull out this pin, which can be a little bit difficult depending on how much you've tightened this down. And swing that over. Put my pin here. Get that all lined up. And then you put your cottering pin back through there. And that is it. Hey DIY team, we're going to be working on installing these StableLoad suspension stabilizers.
DIY with Chris, giving you the tools to do it yourself. Today on DIY with Chris.
All the projects that we do on this truck are available on a playlist on my channel. So if you want to see the other stuff we're working on or have done, also to include the runners, the brush guard and everything installation, you can find those on there. So the main reason we are installing these is because whenever we do longer haul trailer tows and whatnot, if we're hauling lots of weight, then we want to avoid the squatting in the truck and then the sway that might accompany that depending on how heavy that trailer is. So what I always do is install these StableLoad pieces that help close that gap between your overload leaf spring and then the rest of your regular ones. And so it gives you increased stabilization. The other thing that I do is replace my bump stops for timbering bump stops, and that reduces the gap that's between the bump stop and the actual axle piece itself. Big benefits of doing this are listed kind of right here on the box. It says dramatically improves safety, handling, and reduces sway, body roll, and porpoising, or that squatting. Ability to turn on and off in seconds, so engage and disengage is pretty easy on these as long as your spacing is enough. Universal fit for all vehicles with factory installed lower overloads with pre-drilled holes. So all the trucks that we've installed it on come with this little space right here between your overload and the rest of them, and have this little rubber plate that's here. So that rubber plate has a piece that goes all the way through, and that has a hole in it. So that's what they mean by having the factory installed with the pre-drilled holes. So if you have this little rubber plate, very likely that you're going to have the pre-drilled holes, and that'll mean that we can install them on these vehicles. Here's the box. You can see kind of a picture of how it goes in. There's that little spacing, and these disengage or they roll out if you don't need them. And then if you have enough space, which our last truck that we installed it on didn't have enough space all on its own, we had to jack it up, and then we could engage these stabilizers. So it is pretty easy as soon as you get that spacing there, but here's that general diagram of essentially what it's doing. So we put one on both ends there, and it just helps connect that space between them, so it gives you more stability as you're towing. So it has some wrapping there. These pieces, bunch more hardware here. Make sure that these StableLoads are designed to be installed on vehicles with lower overload springs. It does give you some instructions on if you do have to drill it yourself. And it has this little flyer here for a drill kit. We're going to have to measure a few distances here in step 3, and that's going to help us determine how we're going to assemble our wedge packs. So the first thing we're going to do is come right over here to our leaf spring packs, and you're going to measure 3 inches in from the rear, so just forward of that, right about there. And what is the distance, what is the gap distance? And on the front side, on step 4, it says, depending on the number of wedges used, it may be necessary to lift the rear end of the truck to engage and disengage the StableLoads. This is what I was talking about earlier. This can be done with either a floor jack or airbag. So it says, determine the number of wedges to assemble in the wedge pack. If the gap between the lower overload and spring pack is measured in step 3, 3/4 of an inch or greater, so it is 3/4 of an inch or greater on the back end, assemble the wedge pack with all 3 pieces shown in figure 4.1, which is on the next page. If the gap is between 1/2 inch and 3/4, assemble wedge pack without the top wedge, and then lower you use less. Final note on that piece is if you are using less than 3 wedges in the wedge pack, wedges can be added to increase the effect on the stable load on the suspension. And that's overall what it's going to look like. So our bottom piece, our bottom wedge, we're going to make sure that the wedge is going at an upward angle here. The 2 rears will have the full 3 wedges, and the fronts will just have the 2, and then we'll go ahead and start with that assembly there. So step 1 for the assembly, make sure that your vehicle is parked and use a floor jack to lift the rear of the truck up by its hitch. This will help open up the gap. We have the 3/8 by 1 1/4 inch hex bolt and flange lock nut. So based off the spacing on 2 of them, I'm only going to be able to do the 2 wedges. So we have this silver colored bolt. So they're actually looking from this orientation with the wedges coming up at an angle. The bottom one, we're going to put it through that second hole right there, and then every one after that we're going to put it in this corner hole. So it's going to go in the corner. We're just doing the 2 for this particular one, so we'll go ahead and put it back. We have already went ahead and assembled these, so I have 2 of them that just have 2 wedge plates, and then I have 2 of them that have all 3 wedge plates. So we will install the grommet, feed it through. We have the grommet in there. Then we'll take our pack. So this one will just go on the other side. Then take the large bolt, feed that through the bottom. Make sure that's all lined up. Take our pin, take that through the other one. Now our pin can go in there. We have to match our washers, so we'll get another 5 washers. 5 washers, go ahead and place them on that silver bolt there, and then we will feed this where it belongs. So we'll put the pin that we're going to put our cottering pin through and the bolt through these 2 holes, and then we will take the nylon locking, and so now we have both orientations for this, and that's the full 3 stack wedges. And we can start on the other 2 now. Once we have all of our pieces fully built here, we're going to go ahead and start moving on. This is the portion where we're going to go ahead and take these down to the leaf springs. It says determine the mounting orientation, so you're going to put this large plate on the bottom of your leaf springs. Which side is used will depend on the available clearance around the spring of the vehicle. Alright, we're going to go ahead and begin installing the stabilizers now. We've already built them up, and so the first step is going to be to remove this disc here. And easiest way to do this is push up on the bottom, create a bit of a gap. I am using a Gerber. You could probably use a screwdriver or something else, and pliers or something, and just pull it out. It's pretty easy to get that out. The next thing that we need to do is grab one of the gold bolts here, and we have to get it into this hole. You have to feed it from top down, and as you can see right now, that is not a big enough space in order for me to do it. So I'm going to have to spread that. The recommended procedure to increase this space is, it says carefully take a crowbar, put it between the space there, and go ahead and use that to widen it until you can get the bolt in. So this is best done with 2 people. This does get kind of scary doing this, especially if your crowbar slips. It's not quite enough space, so I'm still going to have to get a little bit of help on this particular portion here. So we'll work together, increase that space, and pop that bolt in. So I'm going to take one here. I'm not worried about the placement overall. I'm going to push on it. She's going to feed the other one into there as far back as possible. I'll increase the space a little bit more. She'll feed it back. Check and see if I can get it in here now. Not quite. I need just a little bit more space. That's enough to drop it in. So overall, fairly easy to do that part. That is the only thing we're going to need the crowbars for. That is probably the hardest part. The next piece that we're going to do is go ahead and grab one of our pieces here. So this is approximately how it's going to go. In order to determine which side your stabilizers, because they can go on the outside like this, or they can go on the inside, but you need to determine, you have to make sure there's at least an inch of clearance around all the other components before you place it. So if I try and put it this other way, then it gets too close to, that's not going to be quite an inch, and you'll see how far off the back it's hanging here. So the best way to put this one is keeping the whole plate on. And that still gives me clearance here from everything else all the way around 1 inch. And then we can go ahead and start doing the rest of the assembly. Okay, so our next portion here, once we have decided the orientation here, which we're going to have it this way, you do need to measure your leaf spring, the thickness or the width of the leaf spring. They have 3 different configurations in the manual. So based on the width of your leaf spring determines which one of these holes, or if it's on both sides, that you need to set up your stabilizers, which just locks it and keeps it perpendicular to the leaf spring itself. So ours is over 3 inches wide, which is the biggest configuration, which means we're just going to put one bolt in there. So we're going to take one of the small ones that they provided, and we're going to go from underneath to up top, and that furthest out position. And then we'll take the nylon nut here, locking nut, and put it on top, and then we can go ahead and tighten that one down. You can tighten down this particular one, and then we'll go ahead and remount it and then start tightening it onto the actual leaf spring bolt. Alright, the last step is just make sure everything's tightened down. So we have this last stabilizer on the other side to keep it perpendicular. We have this one that is actually securing it to the leaf spring. Make sure that's tight. And then we have this this close one, which allows the rotation of the wedges to go in. And then put your cottering pin in. So the cottering pin, the orientation that they show in the diagram is something like this, keeping it that way. I found that it actually works just about right. I can loop it over this bolt here. That should reduce vibration. It still keeps it in that middle channel right there, so I'll probably just leave it there for right now and see how that works out. I have some other cottering pins if it doesn't, but everything's pointed down, so it should be secured pretty well this way. And that is it for installing it. We'll go ahead and move on to the rear one and start there. Alright, we got everything tightened down, and now we're going to go ahead and just apply that last washer, locking washer, and the golden nut here. Tighten it up. Last step I'll show you is engaging the stabilizers. So you'll just pull out this pin, which can be a little bit difficult depending on how much you've tightened this down. There is a foot-pound torque specification that you're supposed to do that to. This bottom one is shorter so that it avoids the head of your pin there. And you can swing that over. And then you'll just keep on swinging it over until your pin can drop back down and get into position. So I'll put my pin here. Get that all lined up. And then you put your cottering pin back through there and that is it. So that is the stabilizer locked in position. You can see that there's actually a little bit of spacing here, and we have all 3 wedge pieces in, and there's still a little bit of space, but our truck is still jacked up. So once we take it off those the jack stands and lower it down, then it'll close down on that space, and it'll lock that in and essentially close that gap and make them all one unit instead of having the overload spring disengaged. So that is the purpose of these. That's how you install it. That's what it looks like engaged. And then same thing for disengage, cotter pin back in, and we're good to go. Make sure that everything is tightened back down. So I will go ahead and tighten this piece back up, and that is it for this project.
DIY with Chris, giving you the tools to do it yourself. Today on DIY with Chris.